They didn't just shut down my solar panels. They tried to make me feel like I'd done something illegal, like I'd crossed a line I didn't even know existed, and that's when I decided I wasn't going to play nice anymore. I came home that evening expecting to see clean rows of glass catching the last bit of sunlight. You know, that quiet satisfaction you get when something you planned for months finally comes together. Instead, I saw red. Bright red stickers slapped across every single panel, like some kind of crime scene, tape flapping in the wind, a notice hanging crooked on my front door. For a second, I honestly thought something serious had happened, like a safety recall or a fire risk I hadn't heard about. But then I read it, and it hit me: unauthorized installation. Violation of community architectural standards. Remove immediately or incur daily fines of $200. I stood there for a while just staring at it, keys still in my hand, work boots dusty, trying to process how 24 solar panels, installed with permits, inspected, signed off, paid for in full, almost 19 grand all in, could suddenly be unauthorized. And then the anger started creeping in, slow at first, then all at once. Because this wasn't some mistake, someone had decided this. I walked around the side of the house, checking the inverter, the wiring, half expecting to find something actually wrong. But everything was perfect, just like the contractor promised. I even pulled up the county approval emails on my phone, scrolling through them right there in my driveway like I needed to reassure myself I wasn't losing my mind. Everything checked out. Every permit stamped. Every inspection cleared. So who exactly thought they had the authority to shut this down? That's when I saw the name at the bottom of the notice: Stonebridge Ridge Homeowners Association. And that's where things stopped making sense. Because I don't live in Stonebridge Ridge. Not even close. My place sits on 3 acres of old farmland that's been in my family since before that whole development existed. My nearest neighbor's a good 100 yards away, and beyond that it's just open land until you hit their subdivision. All those identical stucco houses lined up like they were stamped out of a mold. I remember actually laughing at first, like, this has to be some kind of clerical mix-up. Wrong address, wrong property, someone got sloppy. But the more I looked at those stickers, the more it felt intentional. Like someone had physically driven out here, walked onto my property, and decided they had a say in what I could do with my own roof. That laugh didn't last long. I peeled one of the stickers off and crumpled it in my hand, then grabbed my phone and called the number listed on the notice. It rang a few times before a guy picked up, voice smooth, almost rehearsed. Stonebridge Ridge HOA, this is Daniel Halvorson speaking. I introduced myself, told him I was standing on my property looking at a violation notice that made no sense, and there was this pause, just long enough to feel deliberate. Then he said, calm as anything, "Yes, Mr. Carter, we're aware of your installation." Aware? Like I'd asked permission or something. I felt my jaw tighten. You're aware of it? You're not even my HOA. He didn't miss a beat. Recent county ordinances extend architectural oversight to surrounding properties that impact community visual harmony. I swear, the way he said it. Visual harmony. Like we were talking about a painting instead of a working farm. I stepped out onto my porch, looking out at the panels again, sunlight bouncing off them, clean, efficient, not hurting anyone. So let me get this straight, I said, trying to keep my voice level. You're telling me you can control what I put on my house, even though I don't live in your neighborhood? He gave this little chuckle, the kind that doesn't sound amused so much as condescending. Control isn't the word I'd use, Mr. Carter. Compliance is. That was the moment something shifted for me. Up until then I was irritated, confused, but now it felt personal. Like this guy genuinely believed he had authority over me. Like my land, my decisions, my money. None of that mattered because it didn't fit his idea of what things should look like. I told him I had permits, inspections, everything done by the book. He responded like he'd already heard it all before, like it didn't matter. County approval and HOA approval are separate matters, he said, almost bored. You'll need to remove the panels or submit for architectural review. Until then, fines will begin accruing. And just like that, he was ready to hang up. I stopped him. Hey, what ordinance are you even talking about? Another pause, shorter this time. You're welcome to review the county's updated land use guidelines. And then the line went dead. I stood there with the phone still against my ear, listening to nothing, feeling that anger settle into something colder, something more focused. Because here's the thing, when someone's bluffing, they usually over-explain. They throw details at you, try to sound convincing. This guy didn't. He gave just enough to sound official, then backed off. And that didn't sit right with me. So I went inside, grabbed my laptop, and started digging. If there really was a new ordinance, I'd find it. And if there wasn't, well, then I'd know exactly what kind of game he was playing. It took me a couple hours, digging through county records, zoning updates, public meeting notes, the kind of stuff most people would never bother reading. And yeah, there was a new regulation about solar installations, but it didn't say what he claimed. Not even close. In fact, it said the opposite. It explicitly limited the ability of HOAs to block renewable energy systems, especially for properties outside their jurisdiction. The whole point of the law was to prevent exactly this kind of interference. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, feeling that slow, steady clarity settle in. Daniel Halvorson wasn't enforcing the law. He was hoping I didn't know it. And that's when I started thinking about Stonebridge Ridge itself. The way it went up almost overnight. The rumors I'd heard at the hardware store, guys talking about rushed builds, corners cut, inspections pushed through faster than they should have been. At the time, it didn't matter to me. It wasn't my neighborhood. But now I had a reason to care. Because if they were willing to overstep like this, to walk onto my property and try to strong-arm me into compliance, then maybe they weren't as clean as they wanted people to believe. That thought stuck with me longer than I expected. Long enough that later that night, I texted an old friend of mine, someone who worked county inspections. Just a simple message. You still seeing issues in those new developments? He replied quicker than I thought he would. More than you'd believe. And right there, that was the moment the whole situation stopped being about solar panels. It became something else entirely. He showed up the next evening with a six-pack and that same tired look I remembered from years back. Like a guy who's seen too many things go wrong and stopped being surprised by any of it. We sat out on my porch, the sun dipping low behind the tree line, my panels catching that last stretch of light like they were doing exactly what they were meant to do. And I didn't even bring up the HOA right away. I just let the conversation drift. Work, life, the usual, until I finally said, "You ever deal with developments like Stonebridge Ridge?" He didn't answer immediately, just took a sip, leaned back, eyes narrowing a little like he was sorting through memories he didn't necessarily enjoy revisiting. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "Fast builds, tight deadlines, lots of pressure to sign off quick. Why?" I shrugged, tried to keep it casual. "Just heard some things." He gave this quiet laugh, not amused, more like resigned. "You always hear things," he said. "But in this case, most of it's true." That got my attention. I turned a little in my chair, facing him now. "Define true." He scratched his jaw, thinking about how much to say, and then finally went for it. "Undersized panels, poor grounding, wiring that barely meets minimum spec if you're being generous. And that's just what we catch. A lot slips through because nobody wants to be the guy holding up an entire subdivision." There it was. Not rumors. Not exaggeration. Just reality. I let that sit for a second, then asked the question that had been forming in the back of my mind since I read that violation notice. What happens if someone reports a concern? He looked at me, really looked this time, like he was putting the pieces together. "Depends," he said slowly. "But if it's flagged as a safety issue, it gets checked. Usually within a couple days." I nodded, kept my tone neutral. "Anonymous." That's when he smiled. Not a big grin, just a small, knowing kind of smile. "Anonymous tips get taken seriously," he said, "sometimes more seriously than the official ones." We didn't say much after that. Didn't need to. The air between us had shifted, and we both knew it. He finished his beer, set the empty bottle on the railing, and stood up. "Just be careful what you stir up," he added, almost as an afterthought. "Stuff like that doesn't stay small." I told him I understood, and I meant it. But I also knew something else just as clearly. This thing had already gotten bigger than it should have the moment someone decided they could walk onto my land and tell me what I could or couldn't do. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not out of nerves, not exactly, more like focus. The kind that settles in when you've made a decision and there's no point second-guessing it anymore. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened up the county reporting form. It was simpler than I expected. Just a series of fields, location, nature of concern, any observed issues. I didn't exaggerate. Didn't need to. I described flickering lights, inconsistent power loads, the kind of electrical behavior that raises flags without pointing fingers. It was all technically plausible, And more importantly, it was enough. Before hitting submit, I paused for just a second, staring at the screen, thinking about what this would set in motion. Then I clicked it. At first, nothing happened. Monday came and went, quiet as ever. The panels stayed covered in those red notices, the wind tugging at the edges like they were trying to peel themselves off. I went to work, came home, went through the motions, but there was this underlying tension, like waiting for a storm you knew was coming but couldn't see yet. Tuesday morning, I heard the trucks. Not one or two, a whole line of them. Heavy engines, diesel rumble, the kind of sound that doesn't belong in a quiet neighborhood. I stepped out onto my porch with my coffee and looked towards Stonebridge Ridge. Sure enough, county vehicles were rolling in, marked official, impossible to ignore. They didn't come quietly either. Equipment trailers, tool kits, inspection vans. This wasn't a quick check. This was a full sweep. I leaned against the railing, watching from a distance as they set up. At first, it seemed random. A house here, another one down the street. Inspectors moving methodically, clipboards in hand, opening panels, checking connections. But it didn't take long for things to shift. You could see it in their body language. The way they stopped talking casually and started focusing. One house turned into three. Three turned into a whole row. By midday, the first red tags went up. Not the same kind as mine. These were serious. Unsafe occupancy notices. I could almost feel the tension ripple through the neighborhood from where I stood. People stepping outside, confused, concerned, watching as inspectors moved from home to home like they were following a trail that kept getting worse. Later that afternoon, I drove past the entrance just to get a closer look. Nobody stopped me. Nobody even noticed me. All eyes were on the inspectors. I rolled down my window as I passed one of the houses being worked on, caught a snippet of conversation, panels undersized, not even close to code. Another voice chimed in, sharper this time. Check the grounding on the next one. I'm seeing a pattern here. A pattern. That's when I knew this wasn't going to stay contained. By Wednesday, it had escalated. Utility trucks lined the streets, crews unloading equipment, generators humming in driveways. Temporary power setups snaked across lawns, cables running like veins through the neighborhood. And the noise, constant. Drills, saws, the metallic clang of tools hitting concrete, engines revving, people shouting over each other just to be heard. The kind of noise that gets into your head and stays there. I ran into one of the residents at a gas station just outside town. Mid-40s, looked exhausted, still wearing a work badge clipped to his shirt. He recognized me, probably from passing by my property over the years. You hear what's going on up there? He asked, not even waiting for an answer. They're saying half the houses might not meet code. We can't run the AC, can't use the oven and the dryer at the same time. My wife's freaking out. He shook his head, like he still couldn't believe it. All because of some inspection. I nodded, kept my expression neutral, but inside, I felt that quiet confirmation settle in. This wasn't random. This was systemic. Thursday was when it really broke open. 16 homes officially declared unsafe for full occupancy. 16. Families scrambling, schedules disrupted, people trying to figure out how something like this could happen without anyone catching it sooner. News vans started showing up by then, parked just outside the entrance, reporters talking into cameras with that serious tone they use when something goes from inconvenience to crisis. And through all of it, my house stayed quiet. My panels still covered, still waiting. I was out on the porch again that afternoon when I saw a familiar car coming up the dirt road toward my place. Dark sedan, clean, out of place against the dust and gravel. It pulled up slowly, like the driver wasn't entirely sure he wanted to be there. The door opened, and out stepped Daniel Halvorsen. He looked different. Same clothes, same posture, but the confidence was gone, replaced by something tighter, more strained. He walked up the steps, glanced once at the panels, then back at me. Mr. Carter, he said, voice quieter than before. We need to talk. I didn't stand up right away. Just took a sip of my coffee, let the moment stretch a little longer than necessary. About my solar panels? I asked. He hesitated. Just for a second. About the situation. I finally stood, gestured toward the chair across from me. Have a seat, I said. You've got a pretty good view from here. He sat down, and for a moment neither of us spoke. In the distance, you could hear the ongoing work. Metal, engines, the steady pulse of a neighborhood being torn open and put back together. And then he exhaled, slow, like he was letting go of something he'd been holding onto for too long. This inspection, the timing is unfortunate. I almost smiled, but I didn't. I just leaned back against the railing, letting that sentence hang in the air for a second while the sound of a jackhammer echoed faintly from down the road, steady and relentless, like punctuation to everything he wasn't saying. Unfortunate, I repeated, like I was testing the word out, then took another sip of coffee. That's one way to put it. He shifted in his seat, glanced past me toward the panels again, still wrapped in those red stickers his people had put up like they owned the place, and for the first time since I'd met him, he didn't seem entirely sure of himself. "Look," he said, lowering his voice a notch. "What's happening in Stonebridge Ridge, it's more complicated than it appears." I let out a quiet breath, not quite a laugh. "Yeah," I said. "It usually is when corners get cut." That landed. I could see it in his expression, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his jaw set just enough to show he wasn't used to being spoken to like that. But he didn't push back, not this time. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together like he was trying to hold the whole situation in place. "The developer assured us everything met code," he said, carefully, like every word had to pass through a filter before it came out. "We relied on those assurances." "Of course you did," I replied, calm, almost sympathetic, almost. "And in the meantime, you figured you'd enforce your architectural harmony on properties that aren't even yours." He didn't answer right away, just looked out toward the horizon, where the subdivision met the open land, like maybe for the first time he was actually seeing the boundary for what it was. "We may have overstepped," he admitted finally. There it was. Not an apology, not yet, but close enough to recognize the direction things were going. I set my mug down on the railing and turned fully toward him. "You didn't just overstep," I said, my voice still even, but sharper now, more defined. "You walked onto my property, shut down a legal installation, threatened me with fines, and tried to back it up with a law that doesn't even say what you claimed it does." I let that sit for a beat. "So yeah, I'd say that's more than overstepping." Another pause, longer this time. The kind where you can almost hear someone recalculating their position in real time. Then he nodded. Slow. Controlled. "What would it take to resolve this?" he asked, choosing his words carefully. "Without further escalation." And that right there, that was the shift. The moment the balance tipped. A few days ago, I was the one being told what I had to do, how much it would cost me if I didn't comply. Now he was the one asking for terms. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because I wanted him to feel that uncertainty for just a second longer. So instead, I glanced past him, toward the distant movement of crews tearing into walls, pulling wiring, generators humming like a constant reminder of how quickly things can spiral when the wrong people start making decisions. Then I looked back at him. "First," I said, holding up a finger, "every single notice on my property gets removed. Today." He nodded quickly. "Done." "Second," I continued, "you cover the delay costs. My contractor's been on standby because of this, and that's not on me." Another nod. Slightly slower this time, but still there. "We can arrange that." "Third," I said, leaning forward just a bit, enough to make the next part land properly. "I want it in writing that your HOA has no authority over my property, and that renewable energy installations like mine are exempt from your review. No gray area. No interpretation. Clear." That one took a second. I could see the hesitation flicker across his face, not because it was unreasonable, but because it meant giving up something he thought he had. Control. But eventually, he nodded again. "We can draft that." I sat back, letting the chair creak slightly under the shift. "And one more thing." He looked up, already bracing for it. "At your next county meeting," I said, "you're going to publicly acknowledge that my installation complies with all regulations and that it aligns with sustainable development goals." He blinked. Just once. "Not expecting that." "Call it what you want," I added, a faint hint of a smile finally breaking through. "But I think after everything going on over there." I gestured toward the neighborhood, where another burst of noise cut through the air. "A little public support for something that actually works might do you some good." For a moment, I thought he might push back, argue, try to negotiate that part down. But then he exhaled, long and slow, and whatever resistance was left seemed to leave with it. "All right," he said. "We'll do that." And just like that, it was done. No shouting, No dramatic handshake. Just a quiet agreement on a porch overlooking a situation neither of us would have predicted a week earlier. He stood up, straightened his jacket out of habit more than necessity, and glanced once more at the panels before heading back toward his car. For what it's worth, he said, pausing at the top of the steps, this didn't have to turn into what it did. I considered that for a second. Really considered it. Then I nodded, just slightly. You're right, I said. It didn't. He gave a small, tight nod in return, then got in his car and drove off, leaving a thin trail of dust behind him as he disappeared down the road. Over the next few days, everything unfolded exactly the way we'd agreed. The notices came down first, peeled off one by one until the panels were clean again, reflecting the sky instead of those ugly red warnings. My contractor wrapped up the final checks, flipped the system online, and just like that, it was working. Quietly. Efficiently. Exactly the way it was supposed to from the start. The reimbursement came through without issue. The letter arrived a couple days later, formal, signed, clear enough that there'd be no room for interpretation down the line. And sure enough, at the next county meeting, Daniel stood up in front of a room full of people and said exactly what he needed to say. Careful wording, polished delivery, but the message was there. Meanwhile, Stonebridge Ridge, that took a little longer. 3 months, give or take. Crews in and out, streets torn up, systems upgraded, inspections repeated. I drove past it once or twice during that time, not out of spite, just curiosity. You could still see the signs of it everywhere. Temporary fixes, patched walls, the kind of disruption that lingers even after the work is technically done. Last I heard, the total cost landed somewhere north of $1 million. All of that because someone decided to push where they didn't have the right to. And me? I get my power bill now, and it's about $200 lighter every month. The panels sit up there doing their thing. No drama, no interference, just quiet proof that sometimes the simplest solution is the one people fight the hardest against. But here's the thing I keep coming back to, and I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, standing on your porch, looking at those red notices, being told to tear something down that you did by the book, would you have just taken it down to keep the peace? Avoid the conflict, save yourself the headache? Or would you have done exactly what I did, made a call, pulled a thread, and watched as everything unraveled from there? Because yeah, it worked out for me. No question about that. But I'll be honest, sometimes I still wonder where the line is between standing your ground and setting something a whole lot bigger in motion. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a bad contractor, or anyone who thought they had more control over your life than they actually did, I want to hear that too. And hey, if you enjoy stories like this, real situations, real consequences, the kind that don't always have clean answers, go ahead and hit subscribe. There's plenty more where this came from.